Hi, folks. This is Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D., for the Institute for Dialectical Meta-Realism. I will comment in a kind of circuitous way upon the conviction of former U.S. President Donald J. Trump and possible uh, President of the United States again beginning in January of next year. Um, it is unprecedented, but there is very little that I can personally say because I was not in the jury room. And I do not want to pretend to be something I am not, namely a legal scholar. And so it is limited what I can say. I certainly do not want to put myself in the position of being judge, jury, and executioner in the case of Mr. Trump. That is not my job. And I think it would be really improper, to say the least, for me as a sociologist specializing in religious studies and social theory to comment on the outcome of a criminal trial. And there will be, of course, many other trials to come. And so this may only be the first in a set of convictions for President Trump. Now, whether this conviction makes it more likely that President Trump will be convicted in the future, I don't know. I do believe that it certainly removes the bar, meaning that if people felt, potential jurors felt, that it would be improper or impossible to convict a former president of the United States and the candidate of the Republican Party for president of the United States for this November, that bar is gone. And so it certainly does, it seems to me, not necessarily increase the chances that he will be convicted in the future, but I think it may very well influence how potential jurors might look at President Trump and at least be willing to consider a conviction for him. I am not qualified to say whether he is likely to be convicted or not likely to be convicted because I don't know, to be honest, how the other trials, the upcoming trials, compare to this one, how the evidence in those trials compares to the one that was just completed. So again, I am hesitant to make any statements about this beyond what I've just said. Um, I will say that I have compassion for the family of Mr. Trump. I hope that his family is doing well. I am sure that this is a difficult time for them. And as somebody who values loving kindness and compassion, in other words, in Sanskrit, maitri rather, and in Pali, metta, I believe that it would be improper for me to say anything else. That may surprise some people, but I do have a sense of uh, love for people, whether I agree with them or not. Ever since 20 years ago, when I had my experience, whether it was visionary or not, of Horiat, the black-eyed maiden of white light, I have been very compassionate toward people, regardless of my own personal views on them, what they have done, what their philosophies are, what their political positions are. It is not for me to say. It is for me to act as a communist, as a revolutionary socialist, to engage in conscientization critical conscience and consciousness raising, not to judge the deeds of one woman, or in this case, of one man. So I will not do that. Mainly, again, because I don't think that I am qualified to do so. I know that there is a lot of, there's hand-wringing on the right. There is some amount of cheering among progressives, I guess. Since I am not on the right, and I am also not a progressive, I am a commie. I certainly am not going to engage in cheering, and obviously, I'm not going to engage in hand-wringing either. So to me, my job as a sociologist is simply to look at the situation as it is right now. And again, what I will say is simply that this is an unprecedented situation for the US. Is it unprecedented globally? No, it is not. Many heads of state around the world have been convicted, but not in the US. It has never happened before that a former president of the United States has been convicted of a felony. It is a brand new territory that we have just embarked upon. I will say, as a Marxist, that I do think it reflects the contradictions of capitalism, and that those contradictions are intensifying, especially right here in my own country, the United States, which has prided itself, I think, in a very imaginary way, of being the best country in the world, which we certainly are not. I don't really know if there is a best country in the world, but if there were, it would certainly not be my own. The United States is way down the bottom of the scale on most indices of well-being, of happiness. And so we are not in a position to claim any degree of superiority over other countries, because we are definitely not superior. And you don't have to take my word for it. Simply look at the data. Don't listen to pundits, especially right-wing pundits, people who like to wave the flag and make those kinds of claims of American superiority. Don't listen to them. But then again, don't listen to anyone, I would say. And as I would always tell my students before I retired, look at the data for yourself. That is what it means to be an empiricist. An empiricist is one who looks at the data, who examines it, studies it, and reaches her or his own conclusions, not someone who is willing to trust in the statements of another, no matter how well known, no matter how well respected, because everyone can make mistakes. I remember in the years and months leading up to these trials, there were many people who said, oh, surely Mr. Trump will never be convicted. No jury would ever convict a former president of the United States. And many of these people were reputable people, reputable journalists, and even reputable social scientists. I am not going to mention any names myself, and I'm not trying to claim any degree of superiority, because I'm definitely not superior, but I knew to keep my mouth shut. That I knew. So I never made any claims because I didn't know. I have no desire, never have had any desire to see any harm come upon Mr. Trump, to see the members of his family suffer, as I'm sure that they are right now. I can imagine if I had a family member who had just been convicted of a felony, how I would feel. And so, regardless of what that family is, they are still a family. And I know myself that I lived just a relative few blocks away from the Trump state back when I was in Queens. I mean, I'm a native New Yorker, was born in Manhattan, was raised in the Bronx and Queens. And then in my teens, we moved out to the suburbs on Long Island, which I did not want to do. But as a kid, I had no vote in the matter. And so, having been around the Trump family, having read about them for basically my entire life, anybody who was a native New Yorker knows about the Trump family, whereas most other people in the country basically see him as that character on the show The Apprentice on NBC. He is not that man. He is somebody else. Again, I am not going to judge him or condemn him because I honestly think that would be inappropriate, especially right now. I just don't want to do that. I don't want to put myself in a position of condemning that man. He has been uh, judged by a jury, and sometime, I believe in July, the judge will give a uh, actually will pass out, what will be the penalties. It is unknown. Will Trump serve time in prison? Will he receive only probation? There is no way to know. I assume that the lawyers representing Mr. Trump will appeal this decision. How that will affect the verdict, I don't know. Whether it will delay the verdict or delay the judge's actions, again, I don't know that either. To my understanding, those kinds of things do not generally interfere with the actions taken by a judge. But I could be wrong, because after all, in this case, we are not just dealing with any person. We are dealing with a former and possible future president of the United States. But again, as a Maoist third worldist, I wanted to put that particular perspective into play. What this shows is an unprecedented degree of contradiction in the imperialist United States of America, the head, the beast, really, of the first world. And the first world rules over the capitalist world system. From a critical realist standpoint, it shows a tremendous amount of demi-reality, which was Roy Bhaskar's translation of the Sanskrit word Maya, which can also be rendered as illusion, commonly rendered as illusion, in fact, or splitting or duality. Right and wrong thinking, I think, is another way of considering it. Rather than focusing on the good, you focus on how you can divide things between good and bad. I don't like any of those things. I prefer to look at everything from a God's eye viewpoint, meaning trying to look at what light is shining, not the darkness that can be covered up by the light. And my objective is always to find ways of covering the darkness, not hiding it, but covering it, encompassing the darkness, filling that darkness with brilliant light. And so I hope that we see that in the United States. Do I think that will happen? Sadly, I do not. And I think that this particular day, the conviction of a former and possible future president of the U.S. Is a sign that the U.S. is certainly not in a position of leadership in the world, if indeed it ever was. Well, I guess we were during World War II and in the years immediately following World War II, with maybe one or two stumbles along the way. I'm not going to get into that specifically. But in any event, I wanted to mention that, to comment on that very briefly without engaging in condemnation. I think that is a wrong-headed path, to be honest, to condemn the man, to celebrate his conviction. Why celebrate the suffering of someone? The guy is punished. It's like the same thing. Somebody is in prison. The prison, being in prison, is the punishment. There are cases where guards have abused prisoners. That is entirely improper. And those guards should be charged, and in some cases have been charged criminally. It is also not the job of other prisoners to attack a particular prisoner for any reason. Doesn't matter what they think. It is not their job to punish a fellow prisoner, a fellow inmate of a prison or a jail. That particular punishment was already decided by the jury and by the judge, and that's the end of it. So I will be waiting, as I'm sure the rest of you will be as well, for what happens in July, for what the judge may do. I can only imagine that there will be a considerable amount of guessing on how the judge might rule in this case. The guessing, in fact, has already started, but my suggestion would be to ignore the guessing. Don't pay any attention to it, no matter who it comes from, because nobody knows. Even the judge most likely does not know yet how the judge is going to rule in this case. So certainly no one else should, in my view, put themselves in a position of anticipating what the ruling of the judge will be. For the time being, this has been Mark, by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D., for the Institute for Dialectical Meta-Realism. Have a pleasant day and an even better day tomorrow.